The first thing Calder Hayes noticed was the blood on the CEO's white sleeve. The second was the expensive glass bottle lying shattered beside her car. And the third was the way the most feared woman in the city, a billionaire CEO named Vivian Ashford, was sitting helplessly on the pavement in the middle of a bright afternoon, drunk, trembling, and whispering the same words over and over. "Please don't let my mother see me like this." Calder was a single father who had spent years learning how to survive without anyone rescuing him, but as he looked at the woman who had ruined careers with a single phone call, he realized that sometimes the strongest people were the ones who needed help the most. If you believe in kindness, forgiveness, hope, and second chances, please take a moment to like this video, leave a comment, share this story with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe to our channel so our community can keep bringing you stories that remind us that one small act of kindness can change a life. Calder was 38 and lived a life that had never gone according to plan. He had once been a promising automotive engineer, the kind of man who could listen to an engine for 10 seconds and tell you what was wrong with it. But after his wife died unexpectedly 3 years earlier, he had stopped chasing promotions and started chasing stability. His 8-year-old daughter, Maisie, was the center of everything. Calder worked at a modest auto repair shop on the edge of the city during the day, picked Maisie up from school whenever he could, and spent his evenings repairing broken toys, helping with homework, and pretending he wasn't exhausted. He wasn't wealthy, but his daughter never went to bed doubting that she was loved. On that particular afternoon, Calder had taken an old customer's sedan out for a short test drive when he saw a black luxury SUV stopped awkwardly near a curb. A woman in a tailored cream suit stood beside it, swaying slightly. Her expensive handbag had fallen open, spilling papers across the pavement. She tried to gather them but stumbled, and Calder immediately pulled over. He recognized her instantly. Everyone did. Vivian Ashford was the 35-year-old founder and CEO of Ashford Meridian, one of the fastest-growing technology and manufacturing companies in the country. Newspapers called her brilliant, ruthless, impossible, and occasionally heartless. Calder had never met her, but he had heard stories from mechanics whose contracts had disappeared after one disagreement with her company. Yet the woman standing before him didn't look ruthless. She looked broken. Her eyes were red, her hands were shaking, and she seemed embarrassed by every breath she took. Calder didn't ask why she had been drinking in the middle of the day. He didn't judge her. He simply picked up her papers, locked her SUV, and offered to drive her somewhere safe. Vivian resisted at first, insisting she could manage, but after taking one unsteady step and nearly falling, she finally accepted. Calder helped her into the passenger seat of his battered sedan and drove carefully toward the address she gave him. During the drive, Vivian barely spoke. She stared through the window at the bright streets passing by, occasionally wiping her eyes as though angry at herself for crying. Calder kept his attention on the road. He knew what grief looked like. He had seen it in his own mirror. After 20 minutes, Vivian suddenly asked him why he was helping her. Calder shrugged and said that his daughter had taught him something important. A person's worst day didn't make them a bad person. Vivian turned toward him with a strange expression, as though those words had struck somewhere deeper than he intended. When they reached her enormous family estate, Calder expected a security guard or assistant to come rushing forward. Instead, the front doors opened before he could even ring the bell. An elegant older woman stepped outside. She was in her late 60s, silver-haired, dignified, and carried herself with the quiet authority of someone who had spent decades protecting the people she loved. Her name was Eleanor Ashford, Vivian's mother. She looked at her daughter sitting in Calder's car, then at Calder himself. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Then Eleanor walked toward them, and her eyes narrowed with recognition. She looked at Calder as though she had been waiting years to see him. Finally, she gave a small, almost sad smile and said, "So you're the man she pretends to hate." Calder froze. Vivian's face drained of color. She tried to get out of the car, but Eleanor gently stopped her. Calder had no idea what she meant. He had never met Vivian before. He had never spoken to her. Yet Eleanor knew his name. Calder asked how she knew who he was, and Eleanor told him that years earlier, before Calder became a mechanic, he had worked as an engineer for a company that had once partnered with Ashford Meridian. Vivian had been a junior executive then, and Calder had challenged her during a major project when he discovered a dangerous flaw in a prototype. He had refused to approve the machine until it was fixed, even though doing so delayed a major launch. Vivian had been furious. She had accused him of trying to embarrass her and had demanded that he be removed from the project. Calder had eventually resigned rather than compromise his standards. He had forgotten most of it because life had become too difficult to hold on to old battles. But Vivian had not forgotten. Eleanor told him that after he left, Vivian discovered he had been right. The flaw could have caused catastrophic injuries. She quietly corrected the problem, but her pride had prevented her from ever apologizing. Calder looked at Vivian, stunned. She wouldn't meet his eyes. Eleanor continued, explaining that for years Vivian had told everyone that Calder Hayes was arrogant, stubborn, and impossible to work with. Yet whenever his name appeared in an old report, she secretly kept the documents. Whenever someone praised an engineer for refusing to compromise safety, she became strangely quiet. Eleanor had always understood what her daughter refused to admit. Vivian didn't hate Calder. She hated the fact that he had once seen through her armor. But there was more. Eleanor revealed that Vivian's drinking wasn't caused by business pressure alone. Earlier that week, Vivian had discovered that her father, who had died several years earlier, had left behind a letter explaining why he had pushed Vivian so hard to become successful. He had feared she would become emotionally dependent on anyone, because he believed vulnerability was weakness. Vivian had spent her entire adult life trying to prove she could survive without needing anyone. Now, after years of pretending she was fine, she had reached a breaking point. She had also recently learned that her company was facing a serious internal scandal caused by executives she trusted. For the first time, she was afraid that everything she had built might collapse, and she had no idea who she could trust. Calder listened quietly. He didn't excuse her behavior, but he understood it. He had once believed that asking for help meant failing. After his wife died, he had refused every offer of assistance because he thought a good father should be strong enough to handle everything alone. Eventually, he realized that strength wasn't carrying every burden without help. Strength was admitting when the burden had become too heavy. Vivian looked at him with tears in her eyes and finally admitted something she had never told anyone. She had remembered Calder's face all those years because he was the first person who had ever told her no without wanting something from her. Everyone around her had either feared her, admired her, or needed something from her. Calder had simply cared that a machine was safe. She had hated him because he had made her feel small, but secretly she had respected him because he had reminded her of the person she had been before ambition consumed her. Calder was about to leave when Maisie called him. She had finished school early and wanted to know when he would pick her up. Calder apologized for being late and promised he was coming. Vivian overheard the conversation and asked about his daughter. When Calder showed her a photograph, Vivian smiled for the first time that day. Eleanor watched the exchange carefully. She could see something changing in her daughter. Over the next few weeks, Calder's connection to the Ashford family unexpectedly deepened. Not because Vivian hired him, but because she began asking him for honest advice. The company's scandal became worse, and Calder discovered that several executives had been hiding dangerous manufacturing shortcuts to increase profits. Vivian wanted to expose them, but doing so could destroy the company she had spent years building. Calder told her that a company could be rebuilt, but trust could only be rebuilt through truth. For the first time, Vivian listened without arguing. Then came the turning point. The board demanded that Vivian blame someone else for the scandal. They wanted Calder's name used because of his previous connection to the company. They had discovered that he had inspected one of the old prototypes years earlier and tried to create a false narrative suggesting that he had approved the faulty design. Vivian could have protected herself by remaining silent. Instead, she stood before the board and told them the truth. She admitted her own past mistakes, revealed the executives responsible, and provided evidence that could cost her millions. The decision nearly destroyed her company, but it saved innocent people from being harmed. Calder was shocked when he learned what she had done. He asked why she had risked everything. Vivian simply told him that years ago, he had risked his career to protect people he didn't even know. She had spent years pretending to hate him because admitting he had been right would have forced her to confront the person she had become. Now she finally understood that integrity wasn't something you protected when it was convenient. It was something you protected when it cost you everything. The scandal eventually came to light publicly. Vivian lost several investors, but she gained something far more valuable, the trust of employees who had once been afraid of her. She began rebuilding the company with stricter safety standards and a culture where people were allowed to challenge leadership without fear. She also began rebuilding herself. One afternoon, several months later, Calder brought Maisie to Eleanor's house for lunch. Vivian was sitting in the garden, helping Maisie paint a wooden birdhouse. The billionaire CEO who once terrified entire boardrooms had paint on her sleeve and a streak of blue across her cheek. Maisie giggled when Vivian accidentally painted the birdhouse upside down. Calder stood nearby, watching them with a quiet smile. Eleanor approached him and said she had always wondered whether her daughter would ever learn how to let people in. Calder looked toward Vivian and Maisie and said that sometimes people didn't need someone to save them. Sometimes they only needed someone willing to stay while they learned how to save themselves. Vivian overheard him. She walked over, took a breath, and finally apologized for everything that had happened years ago. She apologized for calling him arrogant, for allowing pride to control her, and for pretending she hated him when the truth was that she had respected him more than she knew how to admit. Calder accepted her apology without pretending the past hadn't happened. He told her forgiveness didn't mean erasing what happened. It meant refusing to let yesterday control tomorrow. Vivian looked at Maisie and smiled. Then she asked Calder whether he thought a person could really become different after making so many mistakes. Calder looked at his daughter, then back at Vivian, and told her that people weren't defined by the worst thing they had ever done. They were defined by what they chose to do after realizing they were wrong. Vivian's eyes filled with tears. She didn't hide them this time. Months later, Ashford Meridian announced a new community engineering program designed to help young people learn practical skills regardless of their family's income. Vivian insisted that Calder help design the program. He accepted, not because the opportunity made him rich, but because he remembered being a young engineer who needed someone to believe that doing the right thing mattered. Maisie eventually became the first student to build a working miniature engine under Calder's guidance. When it finally started, she screamed with excitement, Vivian laughed, and Eleanor wiped away a tear. It was a small engine, barely powerful enough to turn a tiny wheel, but to Calder it represented something enormous. A broken man had found purpose again. A frightened woman had discovered that vulnerability wasn't weakness. A mother had watched her daughter become softer without becoming less strong. And a little girl had learned that kindness could cross boundaries that money, status, anger, and pride never could. Before Calder left that afternoon, Vivian stopped him at the garden gate. She told him that she used to think the greatest thing she could build was a company. Now she understood that the greatest things people build are trust, family, forgiveness, and second chances. Calder smiled and told her that perhaps she had finally learned what he had been trying to teach her years ago. Sometimes the person you think you hate isn't your enemy at all. Sometimes they're the person who sees the truth you are too afraid to face. And sometimes, the stranger who stops on the side of the road when everyone else would keep driving becomes the reason you finally find your way home. Before we reach the end, I want to ask you something. What do you think was the greatest lesson Vivian learned? Learning to ask for help, choosing honesty over success, or finally forgiving herself? Leave a meaningful comment below and tell our community what this story meant to you. If this story touched your heart, please like this video, leave a meaningful comment, share it with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe to our channel so you never miss another emotional journey. Because sometimes one act of kindness doesn't just help someone survive their worst day. Sometimes it gives them the courage to become a completely different person.